Hello and welcome to Money Matters TV. I'm Patricia Dunn, a senior consultant, senior vice president with Merrill Lynch, and today my co-host is Michael Karwic, certified financial planner with Simone, Zajac Wealth Management. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Pat.
And later we have an exceptional guest today. Our guest is Rob Drover, who happens to work for Marcum, LLP, which is one of the largest independent accounting and advisory firms in the country. And Rob's position is he leads the National Process Improvement Practice. So he has some interesting things to say.
That's right.
But before we get to our guest, let's talk about the difference between wealth management and everyday investing. Many people really don't have a definition for the word wealth management, and they think that doing it themselves or buying target date funds or generic investing is the same thing, but it's quite different. So I wanted to ask you, Mike, who benefits from wealth management? Who should use it?
Well, you're right that the term is used a lot of different ways these days. So it could be defined with a lot of different descriptors. I think one way we could start is by talking about the amount of wealth we're talking about. So when we say wealth management, that tends to be a little bit more of a detailed, sophisticated process. So conventionally, the high net worth space, if we want to call it that, is loosely defined. You'll hear different definitions, but today it's mostly defined as $250,000 in investment assets up to $10 million in investment assets. And again, that's only one way to define it, and we can probably talk about examples of people that would benefit from wealth management. That's a different way to talk about it as well. You can probably think of some examples by profession, or how else would you define it?
Well, I define it exactly the same way. And typically examples of people who use wealth management tend to be professionals, executives, business owners, and they typically seek out wealth management advice about 10 to 15 years before they're ready to retire. Now, can you tell me why that 10 to 15 years is kind of magic?
You know, I think it's magic because they've probably been doing perhaps a less complex way of saving and investing and looking at the future. But all of a sudden the years are starting to get shorter to that point where they start to draw income from their lifetime of savings rather than putting into their lifetime of savings. So it's a big inflection point, and I like that you're saying 10 to 15 years beforehand, because like any goals we set in life, it's helpful to do some planning beforehand. It's very tough, and you know this, when clients come to us with 1 or 2 years to retirement and say, I'm not sure I'm on track. You know, let's look at the whole complex wealth management picture and see how I'm doing. Well, if I only have a year to close any gaps, that makes it very difficult. So I love hearing 10 to 15 years or more. That's actually a pleasure. So you mentioned clients coming to see us. What do you think investors are looking for when they find someone to help them with wealth management?
Excellent question, because this is where you really start to separate the expertise from the non-expertise. Clients come to us, they're looking for a seasoned professional. They're not looking for a kid fresh out of college with a degree in finance. And not only do they want a seasoned professional, they want a seasoned professional with credentials after their names, like you being a certified financial planner. I happen to be a chartered advisor of philanthropy. There's lots of different designations for the specialties that each of us have. So I think that combination of seasoned professional with credentials after their names is absolutely key to wealth management. Now, why do you think that's key?
I think it's key so that we can create a personalized financial plan for people. One of the biggest benefits to the current era that we live in is there's information everywhere, right? Lots of information available. One of the problems with the era we live in is there's information everywhere. So there's so much that trying to select what's important to us and pertinent to us and best for us, that's where our skill sets or any good wealth advisory firm, that's where they come in, is being able to customize all the advice that they need for that client, that situation, their goals, their expectations, because everyone is so different. Every family is so different. They really are. To customize and pick what they should be looking at or considering to help their future selves out, It's about customization, I guess, is the one word answer to your question. So being able to sort through all the information out there, tell them what's important, because most of our clients are successful at what they do, but it can be a very different profession. So it's not that they couldn't learn our industry, but we've been doing it for, as you said, very often for them to get up to speed on this. So again, they may be smart, successful individuals elsewhere, but when they want expertise, that's when they come to someone with the credentials you mentioned and the experience that you mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, is this the kind of thing, I'm trying to figure out where you would suggest people start. Each practitioner, each wealth advisor might have a different process. How do you go about addressing this for a client? Where do you even start with a process of wealth management for someone?
Well, you hit a key word there, the client. The thing about wealth management is all about the client, not the portfolio. And as a professional, the process that we use is to help them to identify and articulate what are their essential needs, their important wants, and their aspirational dreams. And it's when you first sit down with a potential client and you ask them, what are your needs, wants, and dreams, often the eyes glaze over because they could sooner tell you what they're going to take or they're going to go on their next vacation than they are able to tell you what's the essential need, the important wants, and the aspirational dreams. So drawing that out of them is absolutely the first step. Now, do you believe it's once and done once you identify? I'm sure you don't.
No.
Give some thoughts.
Oh, for sure. And we hear people who describe it as, once I get this done, I can move on to the next project. There might be a lot of work that they don't have to repeat all the time. Setting a baseline plan, for example. But that plan, setting that up properly and drawing out all the information you just mentioned should take a fair amount of work and effort. This is one of the most important processes they'll go through in their life. So getting a good baseline plan does take a bit of time, and it might be easier after that. But once and done is not a phrase I don't think either of us would use. And I'm a big fan of analogies. One of the ways that we could look at this is if you were more back in the day before lots of automation for flying airplanes. If you were trying to head across the Atlantic before as much GPS data and all that we have, and they flew for many, many decades before we had any help aside from a compass and just trying to understand where we're going. If you decided to head on that trajectory and say, I think I'm heading east, so I'm probably going to get to London. And then, since I don't know exactly where I'm going to come in, I don't think I'll check in until I'm almost there. How would that go? Probably not very well. But if you check in regularly, if you do your best to reorient yourself to the current status and look at it and make small adjustments early in the flight, a tiny adjustment can really change where you end up in the end. And the reason I use that analogy is it's a great one. If you tweak things right now, when the clients come to us 10, 15, 20 years before they really want to retire, some small changes in there, get them to their goal. If they come to us with a year beforehand, you might need very large changes, maybe even impossible ones. So that makes that very hard. We had mentioned customizing solutions for various kinds of clients and making a customized plan. It's one of the things that we believe in wealth management. Can you give some examples of kinds of solutions that we mean when we talk about that? Let's help our listeners understand a little more about what we mean by customizing solutions. What might those be? What tools do we have? What could we look at?
Wonderful. As you know, wealth management is all planning based. Everything we do is planned and we monitor progress. And some of the solutions we use include things like trust accounts, mortgages, life insurance, including long-term care coverage, lines of credit, mortgages, and of course, investment strategies that are tailored to their needs. We're not talking target date funds here. We're talking core investments versus satellite investments. In core, you're looking for an S&P-like return but modified for risk, and satellite investments, you're looking for the juice for the portfolio, so that when the market goes up, it goes up substantially more. But you know that when the market goes down, it also goes down substantially more. So we want a judicious blend between the two. So everything that we do is typically fee-based with audited track records, which is another separation from day-to-day investing. So let's go back to where we started. Who benefits from all of this?
I think any investor could benefit from this process. when you're starting out, when you're very young, it might be a simple set of solutions, but you still should be looking at and thinking about yourself as doing a wealth management process. Then again, those people in the middle market, that 250,000 all the way up to $10 million we had defined earlier is one way to look at it, but it's more about complexity. We mentioned people in different situations. We mentioned different careers. I think it's those kinds of definitions that we might want to look at. Really, anybody who wants peace of mind to know that they've looked at their situation. I would even suggest people stress test their plans that they've created with their financial team. I mean, that's a big thing that the more sophisticated investors do. And I think anyone would benefit by saying, all right, I look at the plan I've created. What happens if we have another 2008, 2009? What happens if we have a 1987 or a tech bubble burst like we've had in the past? No one's ever wishing for those things. But if they come along, did you think about it in advance? So anyone that looks at their future finances with this lens, I think will benefit from it.
So in conclusion, I would say that when the focus is on the client, not the portfolio, you can get very cost effective when it comes to growing, protecting, and thoughtfully transferring net worth. It's not about stock picking. It's about what kind of legacy are we going to leave behind because we were lucky enough to be here. It is quite different from day-to-day investing.
Well said.
All right. Well, you ready for a viewer question?
Sure.
We have one from Thomas Lang of Westchester who asks, what is a good plan if you receive a lump sum of money, presumably an inheritance or something, for use as a long-term investment?
Wow, that's a big topic. How long do we have, as they say? Let me give my two key tips to that then. Number one is slow down at first. Very often when we see a lump sum for any purpose, now our caller mentioned that he'd like to know what to do it for a long-term plan. Any lump sum that we get, though, very often I see people start to earmark a part of it for something fun or something necessary, depending on where the money came from. But I would say only do the things that you need to or spend the money you need to in the short term. Other than that, see if you can slow things down a little bit, because we find some of the quick decisions to spend money, even if it's just a piece of a windfall, if you will, aren't always the best spent money. And number two is spend the time here, and I think this is key, spend the time developing a very good, detailed long-term plan with your financial team and your CPA and your attorney. This wealth management plan we talked about, spend the time on the inputs into those plans. Very often people rush through a financial plan and they get the output and then they spend lots of time figuring out what to do with the output. There are so many good details that could go into it. I think they need to spend the time there. What are your long-term goals? How much of this principal, how much of this windfall do you want to be around forever? Do you want it to grow with inflation? Are you going to be withdrawing money? I mean, there are a lot of variables that we could go into that are too long for today, but spend time building that financial plan's base plan, if you will, and then that's the plan you can work off of for the future. And then the last key is, of course, if you've heard of dollar cost averaging, maybe take your time to put that into investments, and if the market is dipping, you might be buying more shares than you would if you just put it in all at once. So put it in over a period of time.
Very good answer. Now for our viewers, if you'd like to send a question to be aired on Money Matters TV, here's how you do that.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says Send Us Your Questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
Welcome back. Now we turn the program over to interviewing our guest. And today our guest is Rob Drover with Marcum LLP. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Rob's job is he is Marcum's National Process Improvement Practice Head, which is a mouthful. So let me start. Well, suppose we can start with a definition of the robotic process automation, or RPA. Just what is a bot and how does it actually work?
Thanks, Pat. Well, in our industry and sort of in the process improvement space, we're always looking for new tools and technologies to help organizations and clients, improve the speed of their and the quality of their different processes. So, robotic process automation is a software technology. So, not like the hardware bots that we're familiar with in a factory setting, but it's a software program that runs on a computer, and it sort of mimics the interaction that a human would have with a keyboard and a mouse. So if you think about something that you do over and over again on your computer, looking up information, going to the web, a computer program, a bot can be created to replicate that process. It can do things like typing data on the screen, it can click the mouse, it can read information off a screen. We call that computer vision. So for example, if one of the steps was it had to click a submit button, it can scan the screen till it finds that word submit and then actually have the mouse click the button. So if you build a script or a process recipe, the bot will follow that and execute a series of commands to complete a task for a user or for a organization. And it does it very, very quickly, probably about 10 to 15 times faster than you and I can interact with the computer itself.
Interesting.
Quick question for you. So when I hear the term bot, I think of maybe robocalls. I think of hackers using bots online to gather information that they shouldn't, perhaps. And maybe those are examples of bots, but maybe not. That's not the good use for bots.
Right.
Does that sound like a bot as you would understand it? And then no doubt there are lots of good examples of how you use this with your customers. So talk to that term bot and the way I just defined it a little bit.
Right, so historically bots have sort of had a bad name, right? You get these hacker bots or chat bots or things that people sort of get bothered by, but really in a industry concept, there's probably three main uses of a bot with our clients. And the first one I'd call a swivel chair bot, which basically what it does is it goes from one computer system to another and transfers information back and forth. For many reasons, whether it be security reasons or just the fact that two systems can't talk to each other directly, you can use a bot to extract information from system A and then go over, swivel the chair, so to speak, to system B and key that information in. So you'll often see in a back office environment, people are sitting there moving data from one system to another. They're cutting, they're pasting, they're retyping, and bot can do that swivel chair mechanism. Another area that we commonly see is what's called web scraping. So employees are going out to the web to do research. Perhaps they're looking up prices, or they're doing other research, but they're doing it in a repetitive fashion. And so again, you can set up a bot to do that research for you, perhaps at 2 a.m. in the morning. When you come into your desk in the morning, all that information has been prepared for you. It's formatted nicely in a spreadsheet, and it saved you 2 hours of work. And the third main area, I would call it sort of multi-system interaction. And a great example would be employee onboarding. So an organization that's hiring a lot of staff, the HR manager typically will have to add their profile into some kind of payroll system. They'll have to establish their benefit connection. They might have to give them a computer account, set up a badge in the system. There's all kinds of steps that we do every time an employee gets hired. That would be an example of having a bot go to multiple systems and execute an onboarding process to hire that employee. It could even send them a welcome email from the firm that says, welcome aboard, here's all the information you need for day one. And that could save the HR manager an hour or 2 or 3 even for each employee that gets hired. And you think about it in a high volume, high turnover area, that could be a tremendous cost saving. So those are three broad examples of the type of work that bots can do in an industry environment.
Well, now, Rob, I'm hearing a new term that keeps coming up, and I don't know what it means. A digital worker. Can you explain to me what a digital worker is?
Sure. So we really encourage our clients to think about this automation technology in terms of a digital worker. So if, use the example, if you're going to hire a temporary employee, you invite that employee to come in on a Monday morning, you're going to give them a laptop or a desktop computer to work on. You're going to give them a set of tasks that you'd like them to go through, and you're probably going to train them and give them some guidance on what to do. A bot or a digital worker, it can be exactly that way. I mean, think about it the same way. You're going to bring this digital worker into your environment. You're going to give the bot, you're going to install it on a desktop or some kind of a computer screen so that it can then do a process or more than one process that you've then trained it to do. And it can work very quickly. It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, doesn't take vacation, and can probably work, as I mentioned, 10 to 15 times faster than you and I can interact, So you're potentially looking at upwards of 250 to 400 hours of human capacity per day that this digital worker could bring to your environment.
Wow.
And quite frankly, most organizations wouldn't know how to keep a temp busy for 240 hours a day.
That's true.
Right? They
That's
really have to
true.
struggle. So it's encouraging them to come up with new and innovative ways to feed this digital worker and give it more work to process for them.
I'm thinking of all the ways that these could be used. Are there certain types of companies more than others? Since you see this a lot and deal with a lot of companies out there, are there any industries you're seeing take particular advantage of this, or size of companies, or how would you describe, it's a big question, but what kinds of companies could benefit from this automation?
So I really think it's industry agnostic. I think any industry could benefit from it. It's more about, I think, looking at transaction volume and some repetitiveness and routineness to the process. So going back into the back office and looking at people that are processing transactions on a daily basis, looking at how much time they spend per transaction, and is it once per day, once per week, once per month, or is it 10 times a day or 50 times a day? And then how much time are they spending on those tasks? And when you multiply that out over the transaction count over a month or over a year, you realize that person spends 20% of their time doing this particular function. And that's probably a great case for an automated solution, as opposed to something they do once a month for 10 minutes. So it's a bit of a return on investment decision that you would make. But across industry, the mom and pop type operations would probably not be looking at this technology. But when you get into 10, 15 employees with a certain transaction base, I think it's worth looking at.
Well, let's take that a step further, because if a lot of our viewers are business owners, how would they know that there is a place in their business for this kind of automation? Is it a certain level of business, or you mentioned repetitiveness? What other things should they be looking at that goes, maybe I should be looking at RPA?
Well, I think it starts with education. So just getting out there and doing a bit of research themselves and just trying to familiarize themselves with what this automation workplace looks like. And there's tremendous amounts of education out on the web that they can take advantage of. There's free courses and there's different things. They could bring an organization in to consult with them a little bit, to teach them a bit more about it. But one of the best ways, quite frankly, is to do what I call sort of managing by walking around. So getting into the back office, talking to your staff, asking them about their day-to-day routine and what is it what bothers them, what is the kind of tasks they don't like to do, what's preventing them from really serving their clients because they're bogged down with sort of a lot of manual work. And very quickly you start to bubble up, oh my goodness, they're downloading bank statements every day, they're doing all these repetitive tasks. Those are some areas that maybe we could look at to automate, to free up their time to do more value-added tasks.
Gotcha.
Pat mentioned that a lot of our viewers are business owners themselves, or in management positions where they evaluate returns on investments and costs and different alternatives they have, employees versus bots for different tasks. Is there, and I always caution people against rules of thumb, I'm still going to ask you for one anyway. So is there a rule of thumb about the amount of time it takes to pay back the investment, the return on investment, or the cost that this might cost to implement? Or are you able to speak at all in generalities about that?
Sure. So to start, I mean, what we're seeing is probably anywhere from a 4 to 8 month return on investment, which in the technology business is almost unheard of. I mean, typically you're looking at a year to 2 year plus. So we're looking at 4 to 8 months. The costs range anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 for sort of an individual desktop automation, up to $20,000 to $30,000 for sort of an enterprise level environment that would cover your whole employee base and be able to do jobs across your organization. And then of course there's the time to actually develop the scripts or the rules for these bots to execute on, and that could either be done with an internal resource that has some skills, or bring in a consultant to help you kind of speed up that process.
Well, that's interesting, because as you're describing this, the thoughts going through my mind, could a company use more than one bot? Is that possible?
Absolutely. The bot environments range from one bot all the way up to, there are firms worldwide that are using 10,000 bots.
Whoa.
In a large scale environment. In Japan, for example, where they have a lot of challenges with staffing and the longevity and an aging workforce, they've really embraced automation quite heavily and are starting to use thousands of bots. The key would be if you're trying to run multiple jobs at once. So if you need 2 things delivered at 10 a.m. every morning, a bot can really only do one task at a time. So if you need 2 things delivered at 10 a.m., then you need 2 bots. If you have a large volume of transactions that have to be squeezed into a short amount of time, then you could potentially have 1 or more bots doing the same process, just drawing from the same queue and getting it done faster. So 2 bots will be quicker than 3, and so on and so forth. So it really comes down to transaction volume and the kinds of jobs that you need and when you need them done.
Now I have to ask, sometimes people think about bots, automation, as replacing workers, sometimes American workers, what have you, but do you think that's accurate? I mean, do you think we're being replaced, or is there a shift going on? Where is this headed?
Well, I think as we talked about before, people have been worried about losing their jobs to automation for 100 years, right? Whether that be in the manufacturing world. But what we've done is we've evolved and we've adapted, and those workers that were welding on the assembly line years ago may be actually programming that hardware bot today to actually do the welding. So it's the same thing in the software robotics. We're moving some of these jobs from sort of routine, mundane, manual work to freeing people up to allow them to do more sophisticated tasks. And quite frankly, when we talk to our clients and we sit down with employees right down at the lowest level, and we explain this technology, they're excited about it. I mean, they're almost willing to embrace you and say, fantastic, if you can take away this work that we really don't like and allow me to focus on what I was hired to do, I'm going to be a happier, more productive worker. So we're really not seeing that fear. It's more about, okay, I've got to transfer my skills to a different technology. Let me learn a bit more about this. And boy, I see all kinds of opportunities within our organization where we could actually apply this technology.
Well, as people and as workers, we're evolving, yes. Your point is very good about the welder who's now programming the bot. But I bet robotics has a future too. What do you see that evolving to? If you could peek over the horizon into the future, where do you think this will ultimately go?
Well, I think this particular technology is still in its infancy. I would say it's been around for 20 or 30 years, but it's now become sort of an enterprise technology that many companies are starting to use. But where I think it's going is more of a artificial intelligence kind of approach. So today we have to kind of program these bots to do a series of steps that follow a process. I think what you're going to see in a number of years, and we're not too far away, is that every employee is going to have a sort of a digital assistant similar to a Google Alexa or an Apple Siri sitting on their desk, so to speak, or monitoring the work that they do and learning that work, and then being able to say, hey, I just saw what you did, let me finish that work for you, and become an extension of your workflow. And I think that's where we're headed, and again, it's not too far away, and it's going to be a tremendous boon to the productivity of the average American worker.
Rob, this has been absolutely fascinating. We could keep you here for 3 days. But unfortunately, we have a time limit, and let me explain our next guest coming up is Thomas D Renzo, and Thomas is a management consultant. So be sure to tune in for our next show, and remember, your money matters.